motion for the approval of those minutes.
I second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? All right. Next is approval of the warrants, and if I am correct, there is 4. There's a 5 payroll, a 5, a 6, and a 7 payroll. Is that correct, Angie?
I only signed 4, so.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, 2, 5, 6, and 7.
All right, so I will make a motion for the approval of warrants 5 payroll, 5, 6, and 7 payroll.
I second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? All right, next we're on to acknowledgements.
Jake,
Yes.
Sorry. I just got a text from Brian, and he says, I've joined Hangout, but I don't see anybody. Are you on? I don't think he's joined this link. Should we re-forward him the link, the last link sent to me this afternoon by Sean?
Sean, can you come out and assist, please? Okay.
While Sean's doing that, do we want to go through acknowledgements? All right, should we start at the...
That's fine. I can. Wait, here he is. He's here.
Yeah, just figured out wrong Google account.
Yeah.
All right, so at this point, we're at acknowledgements, so why don't we start down at the end with our student advisors?
Get to go first this time. I'd just like to acknowledge the students and faculty that helped out with homecoming last week. It was a very fun and productive week.
I'll echo those acknowledgements.
I'd like to acknowledge the staff at Asa Adams for a very nicely done and well-attended open house. Kids seemed to have a good time. School was packed and looked great, so thank you.
I was thinking in my head, trying to determine if this happened since we last met, and it did. I'd like to acknowledge all of our staff and administrators for the way they handled the evacuation that we had up at the middle school and high school back, I think it was September 12th. And the students really were very patient and understanding, and we found that it was actually a good exercise for us to learn some things and improve. So I appreciate everyone's efforts during that and input for how we can improve and get better. So thank you to all the staff, administration, and students for how they handled that.
I had nothing at this point. Brian, did you have anything, acknowledgement-wise?
I don't have anything to add for acknowledgements.
Michelle?
Not at this time. Thank you.
I just wanted to echo the open house was really wonderful at ASA, and that we had a spirit night. The PTO had a spirit night, and it went really well also.
All right, so we're on to public comment. I'm assuming there was not a sign-up sheet. Does anyone have any public comment? All right, seeing none, I'll move on to presentations, and the first is the superintendent report.
Sure, I brought for you tonight a copy of our agenda for this Friday's teacher workshop day, so you can have a sense for what went on. And I apologize, Michelle and Brian, I'm going to have to get more accustomed to sending you these things in advance. The workshop day really was planned with pretty broad input on what might be helpful to offer. We're doing kind of two components to the day, a curriculum focus in the morning, really carrying forward the work that was completed last year and taking it to the next step. And then in the afternoon, the mini U format with several sessions through the afternoon with about 10 or so different topics being presented. So we're looking forward to this and expect that it'll be a really productive day for our staff.
All right, next we'll move on to principal reports. Mr. Ruland.
Hello, everyone. Next week we have our parent-teacher conferences. Progress reports were mailed out yesterday, and so our conferences are next Tuesday and Wednesday. Also next week we have our PSATs for our 10th and 11th graders. So that is it's a busy week. I think the other thing I want to highlight in the report is I updated some of the data tables that I presented. I think it was the August meeting. The state has released the results for the other districts in the state, and so I did fill in the rest of that table. And I want to also point out that I corrected the statewide number on all three tables was an error last time for the 2015-16 numbers. The numbers that were on the last report actually reflected all the schools in the state, not just high schools. And so I've corrected that. Yeah, that's really about it.
Do you have any questions?
When I think around data, we did, as department heads, take a look at the SAT results, not just these tables, but also the tables that were presented, I think also a month ago, that showed not just the percentage that at or above the standard, but also the ones who are below and well below. And department heads are going to bring those to department meetings. I think next week is department meetings, so teachers are going to start to dig into that data as well. So,
any questions? Thank you.
great.
All right, Mr. Kinney.
Good evening. Okay, we have a lot going on over at the middle school to start our school year off. As far as our celebrations, every month we celebrate 3 different students, one from each grade level. So our 3 students for this past month of September was Ruth White in 6th grade, Liliana Hammond in 7th grade, and Eleanor Allen Rayhill for 8th grade. Talking to our teachers, they did want me to share that the newly adopted comprehensive sexuality program that was approved by the board is up and running, and it is going over very well. On the document you see Ms. Deshane, Mr. Buhner, Ms. Archer, Ms. Lissa Pelletier, and Mr. Buhner are all partaking in this, and they've enjoyed everything that they've discussed so far in the classes, and the students seem to be responding very well. I did want to point out that our boys cross-country team won the annual Center Drive Invitational on 9/25. It's a trophy that's hard to miss when you come in our school. There's a big golden shoe on top of a trophy. So it's funny looking, but very proud of them. Some of you might have received a Google form survey that I sent home to all parents. I was curious to see what the best means of communication was as far as the middle school goes with our families at home. There is a document, I think, that was shared with you with the different graphs. Yep, thank you. And on that there was some pretty interesting results. Overwhelmingly, I think email is probably the best means of communication. I think what we will do at the middle school is very similar to what Mr. Rulin does at the high school. With the MailChimp system software program. That way I can reach parents, and then I might also dabble in some other things as far as text messages for some very quick messages to parents. So that will be starting hopefully this Friday as far as the communication goes. We just finished up, actually tomorrow we have a couple more testing, but we did our NWEA testing. We did that last week. We started Wednesday, went Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and these last couple of days we were doing makeups. And along those lines, within our faculty meetings and our department meetings, we've been talking about what are we going to do with this NWEA data, the fall data that we just received, and the MEA data from last year, and what that's going to look like at the middle school. So we're really starting to dive into that and talk about how we're going to use that this upcoming school year. Professional development, at our department meetings, I talked about the NWEA reports. There's a lot of information that you can get off of that. So what I did, and I've been working with teachers as far as how to run those reports and what do we want to use from the reports that we have. We did with Miss Brady, professional development, I guess you could call it refresher, on supervision and evaluation, and talked about what that will look like at Orono Middle School this upcoming year. And we also spent some time with IXL. This year at the middle school, we have not only are we using My IXL soft program, but we also purchased ELA IXL software, and it's become a big part of our culture at the middle school. So in order to use it correctly and use it wisely, we've spent some time with the teachers digging apart how to use that program. I talked about the individual student MEA data was released on 9/29, and as of probably tomorrow, we'll have all the information we need with the NWA data. And then finally, just wanted to talk about, probably most of you have already heard, that unfortunately we had to cancel our middle school football team. Numbers were low going into the season, we knew that, but we were able to put probably about 12 or 13 kids, I think, on the team, but due to injuries and a lack of experience, I think the biggest reason why we canceled, I know the biggest reason we canceled the season was safety concerns. There were the one game we played, we were down to I think 8 players. It was new to the kids and they were getting hurt, so we decided to call the season. However, on that note, I did want to say that this early May, I've been talking to some community members, and we're going to have a meeting with all kinds of different stakeholders and talk about next year's football team, so we can be proactive and do what we can to get the numbers higher for the start of the school year next year.
So is it my understanding that the football players were allowed, if they so chose, to join another team? Do you know how many
Sure.
of them?
Yeah, I want to say there's probably about 6 or 7 of them that did. Yep. We had some join the soccer team. We had, I think, 2 join the cross-country team. And I think there was 2 that joined the youth football program within the community. Yep.
Any other questions?
We've got kind of one question, one.
Sure.
So you were mentioning, this is not necessarily a question even to answer now, but I'm curious to hear what kind of training would be useful around the Nuias. Is it something that we can handle entirely internally, or do we need to look at bringing in some external training as we kind of ramp up on these?
Sure. I can tell you right now what we've done is pretty basic. On the website itself, it offers several tutorial videos. I've spent some time looking at that, and that's what I did with the teachers. And right now, that seems pretty sufficient. I can tell you the prep conference, there was a training by someone by the name of Miss Higgins, who's pretty proficient with NWA. So I think between using Miss Higgins as a resource and then what they offer on the website, I think we should be okay for right now.
But we also have some plans to do some further training with the K-8 staff through some of their afternoon trainings throughout the year to go deeper into some of the reports and to the data. So we have discussed doing that and have the beginning of a plan for how that might look, but more work to do to think about what their needs are. But yeah, I'm pulling from my background during my short stint as an NWA staff developer, so I can help up to a certain point with that, and if we decide the needs are greater, then certainly we can seek outside support for that.
Yeah, Ms. Higgins and I were talking at our last meeting. I think we were going to offer the student profile report, which is a new feature that they offer. And with the middle school's professional development days, I plan on using a lot of those for diving deep into that type of stuff. And I think Ms. Higgins is going to be able to come over and talk to us about that.
So I guess I've got one question and one comment. Question, I know that you're not done yet, so certainly I'm not trying to put any pressure on, but do you have any idea when preliminary or even more advanced NWA data analysis will be ready for us to take a look at?
As far as the middle school goes?
Yeah.
That, if needed, it could be the next meeting. As far as what you would like, I could definitely put something together.
Okay.
But we've just been waiting. I think we have, I was talking to Mr. Buhner, and we have 12 students left that have to do makeups.
Okay.
We're going to try to finish that up tomorrow, and then I'm actually kind of excited to start diving into it and see what we have.
Okay,
But,
great.
Yep, whatever you need, just let me know.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Yeah, I think we had talked about doing some preliminary data, right? Soon after assessment data was available. And then the December, the kind of deeper
That'll
dive.
be the bigger one.
Yeah, so
Okay.
we'll plan for that for our next meeting.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. And then I guess my comment would be, and I think this probably is already on everybody's list, but just to reiterate that I think that when we have that May meeting for next year's middle school football team, that one of the things I've noticed, kind of not in any kind of school board capacity, but just as a community member, that there's been some rigidity on the part of some in looking at how to make football work at the middle school, and I would just urge everyone to kind of come in with an open mind at looking at a variety of different solutions to that. And so I think it can work. It's going to require some different actors kind of pulling together for it. So
Yep, definitely.
that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next I believe Sean is going to give us a Blackboard update.
Oh, Darcy has one thing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're next up, Sean.
I thought of something. So I apologize, I didn't have my written report done. It was a misunderstanding on my part. But I did want to talk about the NUIA glitch that occurred at the ASA. During the ASA week, NUIA shut down for 2 days while we were midstream. So we had a lot of kids in the middle of an assessment, and it shut down. They expressed that they were fixing glitches, and I think what we learned from this is that we're going to test later on in the school year, meaning not when it first opens, so that they can work out their glitches next year without impacting our kiddos. So probably we'll aim for the first week or second week of October in the future to make sure that that doesn't happen again. I've learned that that happens every year with NUIA. Just as each year comes about, they find new glitches and they do new updates. So if we could prevent that from happening next time, that would be good. But we are done, and we're starting to take a look at that information, and we're using that at grade level teams at the grade level to identify Title I kids as we speak. So just also wanted to talk about the IXL. We are working on purchasing that for our 5th grade math program. That's in process as well.
Any questions?
Did we not have, there were any NUIA problems at the middle school? No. So that they
We
bore
took
the
care of
brunt of
it.
that, and then you reap the rewards. Okay. Great, thank you.
I'm sorry, Sean, you're up now.
It's all right, I'm getting my hour, my Apple Watch ring in, so it's all good with the standing, but. So, with the Blackboard Connect, we have learned some stuff, and we've kind of given changes. I'm not gonna take too much of your time, because what I actually discovered, what I can explain is probably 45 minutes. I'm gonna trim it down to about 3 minutes, and give you time for questions. So when Blackboard Connect was first created, when it was first utilized in RSU 26, was in January of 2016. That's when the root file for Blackboard Connect was created using Data Uploader, which connects on the back end of our server to Web2School, our SIS. So each time there was an emergency or report sent out, the root file would become the mailing list, even though Angie would be making manual changes, which was fine for the first 8 months of Blackboard Connect. And then over the course of the last school year, I'd heard some kind of concerns, things kind of changing. And what we had discovered is that root file was the file that no matter whoever's trying to communicate, that's the file it would always go back to, which would explain why postgraduates from 2016 and 17 were getting calls and messages. And we also found that people who had moved by chance or people who may have changed numbers and not getting the calls. Even though Blackboard Connect would say about 96% of people were successfully receiving these calls, looking at the analytics of Web to School families in the district, oftentimes over the course of 18 months, we had students like in the middle school. If we had a student in 6th grade in January 2016, they're only in 8th grade right now, so there's not going to be a major change in their configuration of their contact information. So while the data uploader was working automatically, the SIS is not running automatically. Because in theory, what is supposed to happen is the SIS is supposed to create a new file every night at about 1 o'clock in the morning, and then Blackboard Connect will grab that file and update any contact information. Because Web to School is manual, that process was not being completed, and over the course of time, with the people moving, postgraduates, new people coming in, the original file was still the one that was in place. And so, come the day of the evacuation, when Reg made the original 2 calls, the first of the 2 calls, even though he was getting 88% of success rate, that still leaves out about 80 to 90 families that should have gotten that call. And so after the evacuation was calmed down, Angie and I spent about 2 hours that day. We were able to get to the Blackboard integration team, which oftentimes is about a three-week waiting period, and decided that we would erase the original data file and all the original data, in which at that course we rebuilt the data based on the Web to School communications as of September 12th of this year. And we sent out an email which was read by 98% of people, and then we sent out an emergency call which 91% of people actually contacted, and I'll explain where that 9% was missing in 1 second. And so we also noticed that because of the SIS file format, what was happening too is that the secondary contact was actually becoming the primary contact based on the configuration of the Excel file. So oftentimes the secondary person might get the call but not the primary, or vice versa. And so we reconfigured that Excel CSV to be primary, secondary, work, alternative numbers, etc., etc. And as of our last contact information, we reached 100% of the primary and 99% of the secondary. Why, if you go into Blackboard Connect and you start to see 91% of people only receive the call, is because of a couple different reasons. One is Blackboard does not acknowledge people that purposely ignore the call or let it go to voicemail. The only way that Blackboard will actually acknowledge that the call was successful is if A, the person answers the call and listens, or B, actually actively takes it to voicemail. If a person answers the call and hangs up, that's not counted as connected. If the person just lets it go to voicemail, that's not connected. And so moving on to kind of the third and kind of the fourth numbers, the work numbers, some of the other miscellaneous numbers, is what we found is that the call at about 4:50 on the that day, we found that some people had gone home from work, or some people have home phones that may not have voice answer machine. And so that's where our 91% is coming in. But we updated all the primary contact. We asked all the admin assistants to go through Web to School, make sure all the numbers were correct. We sent out a message asking people to make sure numbers were correct. And we've actually built a new file that's, instead of running off the SIS, I pull that file each night, and it sits on the server that pulls any new changes. So all of our new students, we had a couple new this week, are now on Blackboard Connect. And moving forward, what we decided to do is we're going to kind of adopt the method of kind of what the high school does. The high school sends home their Web to School contact information during the summer, if I'm correct. And so we're going to ask all the schools to do that just to make sure the information's correct. If the form doesn't come back, then we assume that the information's correct. But we're also asking kind of parents to be proactive, like if numbers changing, if you're going to add a number, if you take a new job, to communicate that to the admin assistants at the schools. And of course, one of the things that we decided is, instead of keeping a root data file, is that every Tuesday moving forward each year after Labor Day, we're going to delete the old data. It will be backed up in 2 different places. I'll have it backed up on an external drive and backed up on the server. We'll create the new data file, and then once that data file is working through a test message, we'll delete the old data file. And of course, the data uploader is running as of tonight. I have it syncing about 1 o'clock in the morning. And moving forward, we're always looking for smoother communication ways to prevent some of the chaos that did happen. Even though 88% of people on average received the message, that's not good enough to me. So I'll take any questions, comments that you may have at this point. I think I kept it about 4 minutes, so.
So can I just summarize in my own simple terms here? So I mentioned earlier in my acknowledgments that we learned some things from the evacuation drill, and this is one of the main things that we learned, that Blackboard apparently had some growing issues with the data that really weren't discovered until that day. So I am really glad that we had that evacuation and discovered this early in the year. And based on everything that Sean just said, I'm not going to try to summarize that. He and Angie worked with the Blackboard team to figure out what was going on and correct it. So we just wanted to kind of say publicly what we learned from it and to give people reassurance that we discovered what the problem was and it's been addressed. So want everyone to kind of have their minds at ease that we feel comfortable that everything is, the notification system is going to work properly moving forward.
And Kim uses it each day for attendance at the high school level, and I make it a due diligence to check in with her about the end of the day to make sure none of those file. So every day so far, knock on wood, that communication system for the absent families and students have been reached, communicated, and they've actually gotten the messages. And through the email communication, we did get 100% of the emails, and there was one returned email, but that was quickly fixed when we notified the parent. So.
Thank you. All right, student advisor report.
The main thing that happened lately was homecoming. It was lots of fun, and the hallways looked great after decorating. And Young Americans put on a great show, and I know so many kids participated from the high school that I wasn't able to attend, but I heard it was an amazing time.
Also, just some other activities. There's a bonfire tonight, as you guys probably know, and also graduation with distinction. The senior honor forums are this Friday, and we will be there. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
And if I can just say, the bonfire being moved to tonight, I did tell Ben and Becca that if they would like to leave to attend that, they're free to do so.
All right, so next we're on to discussion items. The first is a discussion around stipend appointments.
Brian, are you with us?
I'm here, yeah.
Do you want to kind of summarize this to begin with, kind of the question that you want to put on the table?
I was trying to remember, this was just the issue of the emergency appointments?
Yes, I think it was a discussion around both emergency appointments and kind of getting the pulse of the board on policy around stipend appointments moving forward.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, so basically, we have policies around hiring teachers and around hiring administrators. We don't have policies around hiring staff, but traditionally that's just been handled by the administrators, and the board hasn't had any involvement in that. So that seems to me that as long as we're okay with that, that's not necessarily needing a policy. But the board has traditionally been involved in appointments, both approval of new stipended positions as well as appointments of individuals to approve stipend positions. But we don't have any policy on this. And that just we've kind of had a tradition that the board plays a role in this, but that kind of got highlighted for me when we didn't have enough material to fill the last meeting. Really, the only thing I think that we had was stipends, and it seemed silly to drag 10 people together to approve stipends, or at least that was my judgment. But we didn't have anything in place like we do in the teacher policies for 2-day memos or starting and then approving later or anything else. So longer term, I think probably in the spring, the policy committee is going to try and actually draft up a policy about the board role in approving stipend positions and stipend appointments. But shorter term, I just kind of made an executive decision to tell Meredith to go ahead with these, and they would come before the board tonight in case there was a concern. But I just wanted to get the board's read on where they still, A, do they still want to be involved in stipend appointments? I think they should be involved in approving new stipend positions, but assuming the answer to being involved is yes, do people think that looks exactly like teacher with 2-day memos or 5-day memos, or any thoughts the board has before we start trying to craft a policy?
I think the board should remain involved in both of those issues surrounding stipends. Absolutely, certainly approving any new ones, but also I think in filling them. That being said, I think modeling it after what we do with the teacher positions is fine with me, but if people have other ideas, I'm also open to those as well.
I mean, I would say I'm also fine with following how we're doing the teachers, having the 2-day or 5-day memo. But new ones, I think, definitely need to come here before they get filled.
Correct me if I'm wrong, the way we do it now is we don't find out about it until the meeting, right? Is that how we're doing it now? How are we doing it now?
Well, I send them out in the packet or
Right.
on the agenda.
Right, correct, yeah, okay.
So I think we're talking about two separate things in my mind. So one of them is a new stipend position, and that is definitely something that the board needs to have control and over approving. And there's a well laid out procedure for that, I would call it, in our CBA. I don't think there's anything in policy about it, but there's a procedure in our CBA for that, and it does outline board superintendent and board approval to move that forward. But there's no corresponding policy to support that, and there's no, we're just, as Brian said, doing the stipend appointments by tradition right now, not because of any policy around that. And we kind of would, I guess I would like some flexibility like we have with teachers, and because we have no policy, it just felt like, we weren't sure how to handle it.
And in many ways, I think it's a harder problem than teachers because, teachers, for the most part, follow a schedule where we know there's an opening in the spring and we hire over the summer. Whereas the stipend positions, some of these coaching positions, we may have more students in one sport than another. It can require a pretty short turnaround time to be responsive to student educational and extracurricular needs. So I do think we need to have a practice that lets us be nimble around stipend appointments, not creation, but appointments. Sounds like there's pretty broad consensus that the board would like to stay involved in both, and that they would like to have some flexibility written into a policy to allow for quick appointments when necessary. So I can take that to the policy subcommittee and start drafting language unless people have further thoughts.
That sounds good.
All right, so next we're on to Facilities Committee.
Sure, Sure, yes. So as you know, we're considering tonight the proposal for the facility study. That's not what this discussion is about exactly. This discussion is really around a committee that we feel like we need to form to really help from our side of things move through this process this year. And it's something that we've talked some about. I don't think we've talked at the board level, but some of us have been talking a bit about this, and it was definitely a recommendation from from the firm that we are considering tonight, that best practice really is to have a facilities committee that is kind of the group that does a lot of the ongoing interface with the team conducting the study. Certainly many other people beyond the committee would have FaceTime and input opportunities through this process, but to have a committee to do the kind of the nuts and bolts side of things with us. And so in thinking about that committee, we really need a couple of board members to serve on that committee, and that's kind of the point of this discussion. We'll also have other representatives from other stakeholder groups. But so I wanted to kind of throw that out there tonight. I know we're adding another committee here, and we're already kind of tight on everyone has committee assignments, but hoping that someone has an interest. I know Brian has an interest. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn, am I, Brian?
No, that's correct.
Okay.
And if I could just expand, I mean, I know this board has historically not favored creating a lot of subcommittees. The only two we've done are policy, because there's just lots of drafting language in the curriculum, because there's lots of details there too. And we've kind of resisted facilities and finance committees, which are pretty typical, but I think there's two good reasons we need to behave differently here. One is there's just going to be lots and lots of meetings, and I don't think it's realistic that the whole board's going to show up at all these meetings. So I think getting some interested parties who are going to show up at these meetings is important. And the other, as Meredith already said, is that this clearly needs to be more than just board input. It needs to have a pretty broad input process across the stakeholders, including faculty and staff and the community and parents and probably students as well. So I think the format, we have two kinds of subcommittees of the board. One is the pure subcommittees, like the policy subcommittee, and then we also have, I think it's called a committee of the whole or something, where we have a mixture of board and non-board members. The curriculum subcommittee is an example of that. So I think Meredith and I both are proposing that we go ahead and create, for the duration of this process, which is probably 2 years, a facilities subcommittee that has 2 board members, since it has to be less than a quorum, and that has, and we could talk a little about the rest of the composition, but a broad group of stakeholders. Is everybody on board with the basic idea that we need a committee like this?
Can I just ask one point of clarification? So will this be, is there going to be a kind of standing facilities subcommittee like you just described, and then a separate additional committee for this facilities project, or is this just one committee? Because it sounds like Brian's saying that there's one, but it sounded like you were saying 2.
Sorry, Mark, I wasn't going to create a new permanent facilities subcommittee. This would just be a quote-unquote ad hoc, but it would be for 2 years.
Okay, no, and
for however long it takes.
Okay, I'm in agreement that we definitely need a committee for this facilities project for sure. I think I'm not entirely sold that we need a kind of standing facilities subcommittee, but for this project, absolutely. I guess I'd want to have broader discussions about the makeup of that committee and the process by which stakeholders are determined and who represents those stakeholders. I'd want to have more discussion on that, but in terms of do we need that type of committee, I'm fully on board with that.
Anybody else agree or disagree?
No, I agree that for this, I agree exactly with Mark. I don't want to create a facilities committee from here into the future and never ending, but I do agree that regarding this subject, we need it, and that may last a little while.
Yeah, I'm also in agreement.
I guess my question would be around composition. I had some ideas about composition. Would the board like for me to bring that recommendation back to the next meeting and maybe start from that, and we can then shape it from there?
Yes.
I was actually thinking it would look quite similar to the group that we had to do the interviews. One thing that the architect team recommended is you want a good representation, but you also don't want a team that's too large that it's difficult to be productive in committee work. So I think we have to balance those two things.
Okay.
When do you envision, or when would you like to have this committee up and running?
I think we'll need it by the end of the month. Brent, what do you, because, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in the context of the proposal, but they plan on getting started right, I mean, we're going to have activities starting on fairly quick order around phase 1, which is some initial stakeholder input sessions. So they described that as November, as I recall.
How big was the interview committee? Is it 8? Is that, do I remember that correctly? Is it bigger than that?
I think it was going to be 10, and we had one member not able to attend at the last moment, so.
If it's 8 seems to me, I understand the concern about the size of committee, and the bigger a committee gets, the more unwieldy it gets, for sure. I do think anything under 10 is probably too small for this one. I mean, just thinking off the top of my head, if there's 2 seats are board seats, and I assume you're gonna have a seat on this, whether it's a seat or ex officio, and then Brent, that makes 4. Teachers,
So that's 7.
right, and teachers, I don't know if I assume that we're thinking 1 per building would be my guess, and we're already at 10, and there's no kind of parent/community input, so I think, I mean, I fully understand the size. I don't like big committees at all. Oftentimes I don't even like committees, but I don't like big ones. But 10's kind of too small, I think. It would have to be, I don't know, Angela's got.
Yeah, no, I think what you're recommending is what we had for superintendent search.
And that was 15. I mean, that was kind of the number that was jumping out to me, and that's big, and I understand that. But if we did that, then that allows sufficient, parental involvement, community involvement.
I mean, I think this is a big enough project that you're gonna have the committee, and then you're gonna have subcommittees under that.
Right.
Maybe around each facility, maybe, in other areas, so that there are smaller groups that can make decisions easier in those areas. Because it's such a big thing that we're looking at.
Well, I think Meredith's suggestion still is a good place to start, is have her come at our next meeting with recommendations, and then we can kind of go from there. We will have to move, I suppose, relatively quickly if they want to be started by November, because you'd have to offer people who are interested an opportunity to submit their name and at least rough out what the process would be for making selections if there are more people interested than spots. And so I think if mid-November is what we're looking at, then I think we need to move pretty aggressively on that.
Well, our next meeting's in 2 weeks, so if you had a skeleton structure, we could go from there. Probably still be able to pull it together by the end of the month.
Yes, I'd be happy to bring that back to our next meeting.
Okay.
Anything else on this topic? Go ahead.
Well, it's raining here, so I'm missing a little, but I think we're heading towards talking about having Meredith bring her proposal and discussing this in 2 weeks. Have I heard a board member who's expressed interest?
Just you.
Well, you have a couple of weeks to contemplate it.
Maybe. A solid maybe.
We'll take a maybe.
I think we need time to contemplate.
Fair enough.
Yeah, Brian really sold it with there's gonna be lots and lots.
Yeah, that
and
was
lots of
not your
meetings.
best move, Brian. I'm just telling you right now.
At least 2 years.
Think about your legacy, though. Think about impacting buildings for the next 50 years.
That's not working either.
It fell flat.
All right, so assuming we're done on that subject, we're next into action items. The first is staff nominations, specifically, if I'm correct, Meredith, extracurricular nominations, of which we have 8, right?
Yes.
All right. Do you want me to read, Brian, haven't you in the past read every name just so it's on public record?
Yeah, if you do that,
Yep.
Jake. And Meredith, I think the 8th one has changed to point 2. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I was just passing that to Jake.
All right, so we can, correct me if I'm wrong, we can do these as a slate. I'll just name them all individually, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So Greenhouse Coordinator, Joe Mason at ASA. Student Council, Angela Slate at OHS. Show Choir, Cami Carter at OHS. Show Choir Tech Director, John Hawley at OHS. Show Choir Choreographer, Daniel Perkins at OHS. Show Choir Music Director, Terry Henry at OHS. Cross Country Assistant Coach, Steve Van Dolman at OMS. And Field Hockey Head Coach at .20, Grant Meservy at OMS. I would need a,
What about international? Their list here. It's on this list, I see that. But it was on this list, but not on this list.
okay, so we have one more, which is Jeannie Griffin, International Assistant.
And that's not.
All right, so if I'm correct, we need a motion for the nomination of that slate, am I right?
I will so move.
And I will second. Is there any discussion?
I have one question. So is this a typo, or do we really have a head coach who is less than, you said it's .2?
It's not a typo. There was a situation where we had to have another coach fill in for a coach.
Oh, okay.
So we needed to divert some of the stipend to that fill-in position.
Okay. But field hockey at
Has
the
a
middle
full
school has a full
coach.
head coach?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other discussion? All those in favor? All right. So next is request to dispose of surplus inventory, specifically music department inventory.
Yeah, so we have a request to dispose, or to declare surplus, not dispose. We think they're going to be able to be sold. There's some value. There are 4 shop tables in the show choir room, and the balance of what's not needed for the Wind Blade Challenge, there's a request to declare those surplus and to see if Brent can sell those. If you've ever been in there, you know they're big, heavy, really industrial, commercial type of tables. So for the right project, they could probably be very useful to someone. So I think they're wanting to dispose of 3 of the 4. Reg could probably confirm. I think there was some question about how many the Wind Blade team uses of those. So, yes. Yeah. So 3 of the 4, and they're limiting the music department's ability to really put shelving in a safe kind of manner along the walls. The other thing is there is some really old speakers, Fisher speakers that Terry says he doesn't think they work. The other items that were sent in the email to you, I looked at the picture and I thought, well, it looks like those could be of value to someone, and then I went down to actually lay eyes on them. The pictures display them in a very flattering manner compared to what they look like when you see them in person. So if there's anyone internally that can make use of these, we would certainly give it one last shot, but otherwise we'd like to declare the remainder of the item surplus. It's several miscellaneous tables, a few desks, and a file cabinet.
All right, so if I'm correct, we need a motion to dispose of the surplus, correct?
Yes.
All right, so I will move in that direction.
I second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? All right, next is approval of a donation from Courageous Steps in the amount of $400 to purchase stand-up desks.
Yes, so Heath, I might need your help to just fill in the details on this donation. But the middle school is going to receive $400 from Courageous Steps, and plans to purchase stand-up desks for what area in the school with that money?
It's for students with, that are diagnosed on the spectrum.
Yep.
It's typically what was explained.
Can you come to the, yeah, you need to come up front. And just really where they're going to go and, yeah.
So in the middle school, probably about half of our classrooms have stand-up desks for students to work if they choose. So Connor Archer reached out and said that there's a grant that I could apply for. and that we could use the money for items such as that. As far as what classroom it's going to go in, we haven't determined that yet.
But into a classroom that is in need of a stand-up desk?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So we just need your approval for that donation.
So I will make a motion for the acceptance of that donation with great appreciation.
I second.
Any discussion?
I have a question, like, are they specifying what kind of desks they're getting, or is it for, you get the choice?
I get to choose. Yeah, yeah. There's a couple in some current classrooms that I looked at, and this was a different style that I found, and I thought it'd be more useful. You could fit more students at this particular desk. Yep.
I just seen something that one of my old schools where we used to live, that they actually had taken, they had tables that you could add to a regular desk that would make it so that you could stand there. So when kids came in, they could choose to take one of those over or not, and were pretty inexpensive for that sort of thing. And I thought that was a really neat idea, that you could have a stand-up desk and sort of choose during the day.
Yeah, at the same time, this is one particular table that I'm looking at. There's some cheaper ones, but the problem is with the cheaper ones, they're pretty flimsy, and due to their height, it's sometimes a safety issue that they could fall over easily. These particular desks, it's hard to move them. Yep. Are you referring to like a workstation almost? One of the...
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they were like movable things.
Okay, yeah.
Can you maybe send him a link if
Yeah, I
you
was just
have
thinking
time?
I just gotten a link from her, so.
Especially if they're cheaper.
I will.
Yes.
Yeah, and it would be something that was not as like permanent as what you're talking about.
Sure.
So I just wanted to throw that as an option. I didn't know if that money was flexible, that you could do something, and then if you had any left, do some smaller things.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how it works. I mean, there is no PO for this, so if it's all right, that's something I'd like to look into, and if I could get more of something like that, then definitely. And the table itself is only $300, so there still is $100 left of it. Yeah,
Great, I'll send you the link.
Thank you. Yep.
All right, so if I'm correct, we got a motion and we got a second and we had discussion, right? All right, all those in favor? Thank you. All right, next is request for approval to change Asa Adams Student Activity Bank account from People's Bank to Bangor Savings Bank.
So this is the only bank account in our district that is not at Bangor Savings. And we're looking to consolidate everything at Bangor Savings. So we've done the legwork to research what would be involved in that, and just need your approval. It would streamline the way that we're currently doing deposits to make it a little easier, even though People's United is right here. It's just easier to do it all at one stop.
So I will make a motion for the approval of switching bank accounts from People's United to Bangor Savings Bank.
I second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? All right, next we're on to facilities proposal discussion, recommendation of a contract for PDT Architects.
I'm going to ask Brent Fournier to come up, Brent, our Facilities and Maintenance Director, to just speak for a brief moment about the contract and how we have arrived at this proposal.
So, I believe you guys all have a copy of the current proposal that we have. Okay. So basically, how we got to this point was Meredith and I had met with two of the presidents from ADT, practice leaders, Alan Cunningham and Lyndon Keck, I believe is how he pronounces his last name. We met with them, I believe it was on the 9th of September. They came here. We did a brief walkthrough through all of our facilities to give them a better idea as to the layout of what we have here within our district. Along with that, during our meeting, I was able to provide them with some information that I'd already collected and put together for them, to include some plans that I had updated with all of our plans dating back from 1938 up until 1982, with the addition to the gymnasium, all those additions at the high school. So That, I gave them the updated version of all of that, along with a traffic study that I had gotten from the town. We also provided them with some information from the race project with regards to some of our fields and some of the information that they had, that we had gathered during that process. By providing all that with them, obviously that saves us some costs because we've already done the legwork with some of that stuff. So we received their initial proposal on the 27th. Meredith and I met shortly after that, after we received the proposal, and we did a conference call with Alan with regards to the initial proposal. We had, looking at the initial proposal, we were looking at seeing if there was any savings for us as a district. So Alan kind of went back, met with his stakeholders there, and gave us a revised proposal, which is what you have in front of you now. One of the things that they had omitted, or some of the changes, there are two changes from the original version to the current proposal, is the study doesn't include a traffic study. What they've kind of removed from the proposal to get us to where we're at here is they've kind of omitted the traffic study and the review of our building snow loads, the capabilities of our roofs. Some of the stuff along with the traffic, they did, I believe they stated to Meredith that they would look at that, but I don't know if they wouldn't go in quite as in-depth, if I'm correct, as what.
What they said is they would have their traffic engineers come do an assessment, and they weren't sure that a comprehensive traffic study was needed beyond that, since we already have the recent traffic study by the town, and their traffic engineers could do some assessment, and it would save us some costs to not bring in what must be a more involved team and process to do a comprehensive traffic study as part of this process. So he said if we get into it and we find we need that, then we can talk about it then. But it was a way to get to our price that we really were looking for, not exceeding with this. Same with the snow load. He said he didn't feel like it was an issue that they were going to have to study beyond kind of some basic engineering studies, but if they get into it and decide they do, they can let us know. They didn't think. I would say that there was one other change from the first proposal to this one around the reimbursables. They folded those, yeah.
They had kind of separated it with their original one. As you see here, it says there's a lump sum for basic services. In their initial proposal, they had separated it. They had done lump sum, and then they also had reimbursables as a separate amount of money. This one here, they've combined all that to get to where we're at right now. So that is everything included price.
Where were we before this figure?
75.
Okay.
Included reimbursables.
So what we have now, if I'm looking at this, unless I'm reading this incorrectly, under fees, it says that they are going to accomplish this work for the lump sum plus reimbursables. So did they not change that?
I asked them about that language today, and he said that they included the reimbursables in the 60,000. I don't think they updated all the language around that, because that was one of my questions. He said we included it in the lump sum.
Okay, so they're going to strike that language out of?
I can ask them to, because it's confusing to have that language in there still.
If we go with this, I would only do so on the condition that gets stricken before you sign anything.
Yep.
And so with this proposal, there are 7 elements to the proposal that they have outlined. They've outlined that here in their proposal. There's 7 elements. First being that they're going to have some community meetings to meet with the stakeholders, create some community forums, and also meet with staff and facilitate some interviews along those lines. Second one would be the educational program, facility, and space usage assessment. And with that, they will develop a space program for each grade level that we have. And the program will list existing rooms, functions, and capabilities, as well as the rooms project the rooms and spaces required to meet best practices and recommendations on behalf of the Maine Department of Education. Third is a consideration for new programs, and part of that is I think our the studies that we will do with our enrollment studies will help facilitate some of that and what we'll need in moving on toward in the future. The fourth one will be the existing conditions and analysis of the buildings and our grounds. So that will be our basic facility study they'll go through, and they'll do all our inspections of within our buildings and our grounds, and determine what needs we need within our facilities and our grounds. The fifth one is educational specifications. They're going to determine the educational specifications is engaging the community stakeholders and asking how they feel about the educational adequacy of our schools. And they'll plan on following client input early in the study and follow up with informational meetings and share the progress of the work. And then six will be capital improvement projects. Once they understand our facility, the program, site, and community aspirations, they'll identify capital projects, budgets, funding opportunities, and timelines related to major capital improvement projects. And seventh and last will be our energy and water conservation analysis with that.
So if you have any questions for us.
Barring no questions, somebody would need to make a motion to adopt the contract because this is over the $50,000 threshold, so the board has to approve it.
I just want to make it clear that we did receive some consideration in the form of reduced costs for turning over, previous studies. There was particularly a relatively detailed process for the athletic complex, and so that was turned over, and we did get some consideration removed from the bid because of that.
Absolutely. So there were several drawings from that process that filled in what Brent didn't have for some of the other drawings that he's had done since then. The detailed site plan that was generated during that time. Also, there was a study of the protected areas around the property and where we need to be aware of those. And also the priority list and the schedule for kind of how that was costed out and what the plan was for moving forward with that in terms of kind of like what they're going to generate around the schedule and budgets. They found that very helpful to see kind of the previous thinking and work around that. In addition to that, though, Brent had, since he's been here, has had drawings of all of the buildings, the interior, and that was not part of RACE, done and produced, and that was really helpful to them as well.
And in my understanding, I was not on the RACE subcommittee, but my understanding is that part of what was done during that process also involves some work on almost kind of like the actual ground themselves and what was best suited in certain places. Almost, I don't know if it was a geological thing. Is that correct, or is that not?
I didn't get an opportunity. I have not looked at all in depth at when I got hired. I was kind of at the tail end of all that, so I missed out on a lot of the beginning process of the RACE project and what had been done up until when I started. I believe that there were several studies done, whether it be with our grounds and wetland studies and all that.
There was a drainage one that was done, I believe.
And all that, I believe, was included in what we were able to gather from Woodard and Curran and provide them to PDT.
And actually, what we didn't have electronic files that we could find, Woodard and Curran were gracious to send us what we asked for.
Great.
No.
Thank you.
So Brian, did you say we need a motion?
Sorry, I had to unmute. Yes, correct. We would need a motion to, I guess we're not negotiating. We would need a motion to approve this contract conditional to the thing Mark said about expenses being included.
Mark, do you want to craft that motion knowing what specific, and I agree with what you're saying, I think you just have the language.
Sure, I'll make a motion that we, do we approve the contract or do we authorize Meredith to sign it? Brian?
I think in the policy, the chair or the vice chair has to actually sign contracts that are this large.
All right, so we're just approving the contract and then Jake will sign it.
That's my understanding. I'll confirm that in the policy while we're talking.
Okay, so unless I have to change this based on what Brian finds, I move that we approve this contract with PDT Architects with a revision under fees, which is the last, no, it's not the last page, page 3, I guess. Under fees, to make it clear that reimbursables are included in the lump sum amount of $60,000. I think that's it. That's all we need.
I will second. Is there any discussion? Brian, did you find anything that would stop us from voting right now?
No, I haven't found it, but I'm pretty sure that's correct, so.
Okay.
Or if you want to wait 10 more seconds, I've almost.
We'll wait 10 more seconds.
Okay.
Yeah, if they just strike that, that's fine, as long as it's clarified.
Purchasing authority, so anything over 10,000 has to be approved by the board, and executing authority. Anything over 50,000 has to be signed by the chair of the board.
Okay. All right, so we've approved it, and that also authorizes, I assume authorizes Jake to sign it.
Correct.
Okay, so we're good.
Any other discussion? All those in favor? All right. So next, we're on to enrollment demographic study, recommendation of a contract.
Do you want me to do this one, start this one, Meredith?
Sure, go for it.
So Meredith did all the work. She got 2 quotes from basically the only 2 companies in existence to possibly do this for us that are recognized by the state of Maine. There were 2 bids. One was about twice as much as the other. Mark and I, in addition to Meredith, and Meredith got a recommendation from PDT. Mark and I both looked at these since we both do demographics in our professional lives. I think we all ended up with the recommendation that you see before you to go with NESDEC, which is the cheaper proposal. Mark and I both kind of regret that we couldn't just do this ourselves. $5,000 seems like a lot of money, but number one, if we want to apply for state funding, we have to go through one of these agencies. And number 2, even if we don't go through state funding, I think it's, Mark and I are not going to be seen as uninterested parties in the schools as members of the school board. So I think it's in our interest to go ahead and pay the money to get an external estimate of the demography of our schools. So I think it was unanimous between us and PDT, Mark and myself and PDT and Meredith, all to go with the NESDEC proposal that you had presented to you. And there's a cost. I think there was going to be an additional cost for a board presentation. So I think we would want to go ahead and roll in that board presentation. So the number in the proposal is, unless that got rolled in since I looked at it, is going to be slightly higher. I think it was $250, Meredith, was that right?
Yeah, the per hour consultant fee is at $195, and the total contract exclusive of that is $4,396.
Okay,
So if
it'll be a few $100s above that, no,
Right.
$4,396 number.
I think if we approved an expenditure of not to exceed $5,000, including the additional consultant time for a presentation, we would be safe.
Yep, that sounds good.
Brian, did I hear you say if it's under 10, it doesn't need board approval?
Technically, I think that's true. I think since this is going to be such a large public contract, I would recommend going ahead and doing it anyway.
Sure.
Also because it's a service contract instead of, It's a little more variable in a service contract. But you don't,
Okay.
Meredith can sign this one. It doesn't have to go to the board for signature.
All right, so we need a motion, correct?
I would recommend that, yes.
All right, so I will make a motion for Ms. Higgins to enter into contract with NESDEC not to exceed the amount of $5,000.
I second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? All right. Next, we're on to subcommittee reports. First is the policy subcommittee.
Yeah, so we have our first meeting of the year on Thursday. Everybody is welcome and invited to come. Traditionally, we get the administrators and sometimes one or two teachers, but we love to have anybody come. We have a number of policies on the docket. Two of them are tiny ones where we already did tonight an approval of a donation and approval of a disposal. We're going to put $500 thresholds in those so that things under $500 don't have to come before the board, or at least that's going to be what's discussed and probably come out of the policy subcommittee. If anybody thinks that I'm a little, that number's been around for a long time with inflation, maybe 600 or 700. So if anybody has thoughts on that. We're also in the October and November meetings going to revisit the transgender policy, just based on some feedback from the administrators to make that more smooth. We're going to look at the facilities use policy, which is not proved, I think, particularly instructive in guiding the principals, in particular around issues of use by religious organizations and also political organizations. This also came up for us right around Charlottesville, so made sense to look at it. I've had extensive discussions with our lawyer. We have strong injunctions on lots of sides around religion and politics as schools. So I'm going to bring a largely overhauled policy first to the policy subcommittee meeting on that, but just so you know, that's coming. And I think we can wait a little longer. The IKE policy, which is promotion and retention, we need to do this year, but I don't think that's urgent before the end of the school year. So those are some of the major things on the subcommittee agenda. Thing I wanted to get feedback about tonight is the policy, was it GC? I'm forgetting the order of the letters here, but you had it in your packet, GCQC. We discussed that in, I think it was June or maybe May, and could not come to a conclusion. And this will go to the policy subcommittee too, but I wanted to get board guidance first. I think we got advice from our lawyer that we should empower our superintendent to accept resignations. There are times and places where being able to do that quickly is important. And I think there was a broad consensus on the board to do that. The question that we got hung up on was whether to treat principals slightly differently. The rationale for that is that our hiring of principals, or administrators, I should say, broadly, is different, and that the board has a role in their hiring, a much larger role in their hiring, and a much larger role in their annual reviews. So the current draft proposal, this is the point I think that we're debating, is that there was basically a two-day memo on accepting the resignation of principals, so that if any board member had concerns, that could be discussed by the full board. But all other resignations by staff and faculty would immediately be approved by the superintendent and then just notified to the board at the next available board meeting. Principals would have this two-day memo process, and then the superintendent would be empowered to accept and again, I guess, notify the board, although we would have already had a two-day memo. So that's the current proposal. I think the thing we got hung up on is whether we should treat principals differently or administrators differently, or just drop that part and empower the superintendent to immediately accept resignations from everybody. And I can craft the language once I know what the board wants.
Do we have thoughts?
I mean, I think what Brian was, you go.
Okay, so for the principal or administrator, what are we gonna do if we know 2 days? Is it that we meet and talk about how to talk them out of it? Or I just don't know what what we would do in those 2 days.
What would we try to accomplish?
Yeah, that's what
I think the scenario this is envisioning is probably where the superintendent forces it, forces, you can't literally force, but extracts a resignation that the board was not in favor of. So I agree, if the principal wants to resign, nothing's going to change. But during one of our interview processes over the last couple of years for superintendents, we actually encountered a situation where this occurred. Maybe I'm overgeneralizing from that one incident, but that would be the scenario. Is it's more of a check on the superintendent than the notion that we're going to convince the principal not to resign if we don't want them to.
Okay, so it will give us an opportunity to talk to the superintendent and the administrator and find out what's going on.
That's right.
Okay, thanks.
I think it's that, in addition to the fact, it's a recognition that our administrators don't necessarily have the same level of protection that teachers do. Because of those two reasons, I'm in favor of treating principals or other administrators differently than other resignations. I've got a couple of suggestions on the language, but I'm pretty adamant that be in there.
Both points made are good, and I agree with them both, so I'd be in favor of it.
Me also.
Okay, so sounds like there's a consensus. We can run that through the policy subcommittee and bring that up to the board for final approval.
All right, so, I'm sorry, Brian, go ahead.
Sorry, everybody happy with $500 cutoffs before it comes to the board on donations and disposal? Especially the disposal, I sometimes think we should maybe go up to $750 or something.
I personally am. Anyone else? It's okay. Brian had asked if we were comfortable with the $500 limit on disposals, and
I am comfortable with that. Thank you, Jake.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I think since we didn't have anything before, 500 is a good starting point, and then if it comes up often, then maybe we can adjust then.
Sounds good.
All right, so UTC, any updates there?
Yeah, we recently had a meeting. One of we talked about a lot of things, but one of the things we talked about was their live work policy. So their students there are looking for work so they can actually get hands-on experience doing the things that they're doing. And the policy is to make sure that they're not competing with local businesses and taking business away. But the other side of that is, and so there's a lot of things in place for that, but the other side of that is that there are students in a lot of areas that are looking, and the first people that they give work to are, the participating schools. So that's something to think about during the year when we're trying to think. And I was also thinking about that heater that we had found. They also will take things in and, they can use things to rebuild and stuff like that. So that might be something just to keep in mind.
All right. Spruce, our next meeting is on November 2nd, so there's nothing new until then there. And then curriculum subcommittee?
Curriculum subcommittee did meet, and Meredith can certainly weigh in here as well. But the main point of that meeting was for Meredith to kind of lay out her vision of what this subcommittee was going to be tasked with over the course of this coming year. And you see the result, or one of the results of it, in the teacher workshop agenda day that Meredith distributed earlier. The morning of that is going to be the vertical curriculum groups is certainly something that she discussed extensively. So that's the big takeaway that I had, and obviously you led the meeting, so anything I'm missing on that?
No, that really was the focus, and to get some feedback from the committee, and they had some really good feedback to help us just think through how we're moving forward. So it was a great meeting. Looking forward to a good year with that committee. Yeah,
meeting was well attended. The few people who weren't there had other commitments that prevented them from making it, but otherwise I believe it was full attendance, and there was a lot of good feedback, so I think that's good.
But it was going on when we had our Blackboard test calls, so Sean, probably like 8 of those calls were people who rejected their calls sitting in that meeting, so maybe that can explain some of our numbers.
That's true. I rejected them.
All right, so do we have any other business? All right, future agenda items. I guess I'd like to possibly on a future agenda take a look at our, and Brian, you may know more about this being on the policy subcommittee, the attendance policy, the last time we've looked at that, how old that is and what that entails. Do you know, Brian, when the last time I know you did a giant overhaul.
Student attendance?
I'm sorry, the attendance policy?
Yeah.
Student?
I'm sorry, student attendance, yeah.
Student attendance.
I don't remember looking at that in our review.
I don't think we've looked at that in a couple of years at least.
Okay. So maybe if we could take a look at that on a future agenda. Anyone have anything else? All right. Any public comment? Seeing none, the date and time and location of our next meeting is October 17th, here in the Town Council Chambers at 6. The one after that is November 7th, here in the Town Council Chambers at 6 as well. Do we have any request for information and follow-up?
I have one, actually. And this, I think, would probably apply to both Heath and Darcy. I think they'd probably have to work together on this. But I am hoping that we could get some kind of report, or it could even just be a table about, I know that there were a number of last year's 5th graders down at ASA who took 6th grade math. I'm wondering how many of those students have been able to successfully transition to 7th grade math at the middle school versus how many of them are doing 6th grade again. So if we could possibly get that, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Anything else? All right, so I will make a motion that we adjourn. I'll need a second.
I'll absolutely second that.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Thank you.
That's all right.
But, don't watch this, man.
And I'm out of here. Time to watch the Yankees. This is awesome.